Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and redefine what we're talking about when we talk about faith.
Hey, our guest today is Grant Faulkner. We are absolutely delighted that you are on our show, Round Hill Radio. And Grant is a writer, author, teacher of writers, podcaster, so much more. And I had the good fortune of being introduced to you through one of the Writer's Digest online courses, I think it was, where you were teaching part of their, I think, annual course on short story writing, or there might have been a focus on flash fiction, very, very short fiction. And then you were kind enough to be available to me for some follow-up questions, and we've had some conversations in the meantime, which I've greatly enjoyed. And did you actually initiate the National Novel Writing Month? Was that your project, or did you inherit that from someone and take it on? Just what was the background for that? Because I want to make sure our listeners know that about your connection to that.
Yeah, I basically inherited it. I was working with the National Writing Project, where I had found kind of my first professional home. Okay. One thing about being a writer is you tend to scurry around trying to figure out a way to make a living and write. Right. And so I was very fortunate to work for this organization whose focus was helping writers or helping teachers teach writing better. But I was interested in going deeper in my nonprofit kind of skill set, and especially like leadership and management. And I reached out to Chris Beatty, who's the founder of NaNoWriMo, as we call it. NaNoWriMo stands for National Novel Writing Month. And this was, Chris had been doing it, I think, about 12 years at this point. And we talked about me being on the board of all, I didn't think that, I asked him for a recommendation of arts organizations in the Bay Area that needed board members. And he said, let's talk. I want to talk to you about joining my board. And I didn't expect that at all. So it was a nice surprise. Wow. And then the other surprise was that when he invited me to be on the board, he said, by the way, I'm stepping down and I think you should apply for the job. And I had really no intention to apply for the, to be an executive director. And it ended up learning by trial by fire. That's the phrase. So, which was wonderful. I learned a lot. That's the way you learn most things in life. In fact, I always say the best way to learn to write a novel is just to write a novel. So that's a little background. So I took over in 2012 and I was there until 2023. Wow. And it was the single most important job in my life. I grew in so many different ways. Like I said, I was not prepared for a lot of it, so I had to learn on the job. And especially fundraising with a sense of desperation to keep everything going. It's always tough, but so I'm proud of those years.
Desperation leads to imagination. That's my fundraising.
I like
shtick.
that.
Yeah.
Hey, you should be a minister.
You know what? One of these days I'm going to try it out. So I'm especially glad to have you as a guest on Round Hill Radio, because we don't actually often get to talk to practitioners of specific crafts. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about ideas, and certainly ideas are a critical part of the writing process. But I really wanted to hone in on a question right away because of your involvement with National Novel Writing Month. By the way, you also produce a wonderful newsletter. And I want to make sure that we get the link for people to check in, because I think I've mentioned to you that I get a lot of newsletters, but I don't regularly read all of them all the time, but yours I do. And I find that it's incredibly thoughtful and well written. And so one of the questions I wrote down, you've spent years encouraging writers, both through your own work and through involvement with organizations like National Novel Writing Month. What have you learned about what keeps people from writing and what helps them to get started again, or maybe started for the first time?
Yeah, it's really the same short answer, although I can talk at length about it. I've been talking about it basically my whole career. The thing that keeps people from writing is that they don't believe their story matters. They don't believe they're a writer. They don't believe they're a creator. I can't tell you how many times I invited people to do National Novel Writing Month, and they told me, I'm not a storyteller, I'm not a writer, I'm not a creator. And I was like, oh no, that is the definition of being human. We make meaning of the world through our stories. We can all write those stories. We just have to decide that our stories matter and decide to pay attention to the things that might influence our stories in our lives. And so the main thing that keeps people going or brings people to the page is believing their story matters. And especially if you're in it for the long haul, I always say you will not write the first sentence of a story unless you believe it matters. So that's important. But then if you're going to write a whole novel or a whole book, you have to believe that your story matters, hundreds or thousands of times more, because it can be grueling. It's also joyful. It's kind of the thing about writing is the grueling part is the joyful part. It's a little bit like being a long distance runner, which I am as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I always say that if you want to be a writer, you have to think about ways that will give you momentum. Like if you're going to show up regularly to the page, you have to make that an invitation. You have to think about what nourishes your momentum. And that can come in a lot of different forms, But if you don't have momentum, people tend to hit the wall and they'd rather go to a cocktail party, go to the movies, all fine things. But,
exactly.
They always say, time management is essentially setting up your priorities, right? And so that's what writing a book is. It's like making that a priority because you believe your story matters.
Sure. Yeah, great answer. I was thinking that one of the ways in which I think that experience overlaps with my experience over the years is people have come to me so many times over the years and have said, Ed, I have this idea. I got this idea to do something in the world, let's say for other people. I want to start an organization. I want to respond to a need. And usually contained in there somewhere is a self-limiting belief, which is that, but I don't think I'm the right person for it. I don't think I have enough knowledge for it. So it really keeps coming back to that same issue, right? It's looking at ourselves and believing in ourselves and what that story means.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Well said.
I want to, maybe another potential overlap between, let's say, a community of believers, religious believers, or a community of faith and community of writers is that there seems to be a similar calling to pay careful attention to the world and also to one's inner life, right? Because this is what's generating these stories. How have you seen, are there specific ways in which you've helped people to open up the portals of their attentiveness so that they can give that kind of attention to their craft and finish that 50,000 word novel or that 32-word flash fiction piece? What helps in that, that growth of attentiveness?
It's interesting that you said that because I actually do think of my writing oftentimes in religious terms, even though I'm not practicing any religion technically. And I always think of Mary Oliver's phrase, attention is devotion. Right. And so devotion is, I think of it in religious terms in the sense that you're paying attention to all of life around you. You're paying attention to yourself. You're paying attention to the mysteries of the world, the questions of the world. And so it really is. It's just a 3-word sentence. Attention is devotion. But I think that writing is a tool. It's a tool that does many things. But one of its biggest benefits is paying attention. I once gave myself the task, which ended up being way more challenging than I thought it would be. And this was back when I went to the office every day and was kind of, whatever, in my rut of a routine. And I decided I would try to note 5 different things every day. It's actually quite ambitious. So I would say, note 1 thing a day that you've paid attention to. That's a gift. And it can be something within you or it can be something in the world. So,
yeah. Love that. By the way, I want to give a shout out to this marvelous book among the various ones that you've written, this pep talk for writers, which I've read a couple of times now.
Oh,
and
thank you,
because partly I think in your work, I don't want to say writing coach necessarily, but writing friend or companion, you've used this book to reach out into people's lives and help them, to continue that journey. And are there two or three thoughts, or maybe just two, that you have if you had someone sitting down with you right now, maybe like me or Leslie, that said, here are the two things I would say to you above and beyond what you've already said to kind of keep that momentum going, the attentiveness? Is there something else that you often find yourself gravitating towards by way of encouragement?
Yeah, I think, I think one of the toughest things I hear from people, especially, the older we get, the further down on our to-do list, creativity and writing tends to go. And that's because our lives are very busy and we're taking care of people and working hard to make a living and all that. So It's really hard to squeeze in writing. And so I think, and especially like back when I was at National Novel Writing Month, a lot of people would sign up and then they drop out on day 2 or 3 because they signed up with full energy and enthusiasm and excitement. But you have to make time in your life. You have to have a strategy of time management to fit in that 2 hours of writing. Yeah. So my thing is, like, if you're not doing National Novel Writing Month, if you just want to be a writer, it doesn't have to be. Too many people think you have to have this perfect setup, and that someday I'm going to retire, I'm going to have plenty of money, I'm going to have a house in the country, whatever it is. I'm going to be able to go on writing retreats, all great. But, that's putting it off to someday, and someday tends not to happen. And so I think like finding a way to make your writing and creativity present in your daily life, which might only be 5 or 10 minutes. I often tell the story of Toni Morrison, she was a single mom in New York City, worked a demanding job as an editor, came home, made dinner for her kids, helped them with homework, got them ready for bed. And she had about 15 minutes left to herself. And those were an exhausted 15 minutes. But she wrote during that 15 minutes. And if you write for 15 minutes a day, you might write, let's say 200 words. And that's 6,000 words a month. And that's 72,000 words a year. Wow. So you can get a lot done in these nooks and crannies or pockets of time, So I think that's really the main thing, is to think about how you can make time in your life to do this thing and not to be overly perfectionist or ambitious about it. The important thing is just to do it with regularity. And that goes for me. I've been writing for 40 years and I forget that sometimes. Like, I've been very intimidated by my memoir to the point that I don't open it. I haven't created momentum for it. I keep like creating momentum and then losing momentum. But the thing is, I need to cherish those little 5-minute pockets of time because that gives me momentum. And momentum is just a gift unto itself.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, really, really helpful. Grant, say something about your most recent book and how that came to be, because you've shared, I've read about your reflections on that, and just say I found the whole process very intriguing. Yeah. And if you could say something about that.
It's currently my favorite book, but they say that an author always says their most recent book is their favorite book. So here it is. It's a photo book, actually. It's a photo book and it's a flash novel, as I call it. And flash, I wrote The Art of Brevity. Also, flash is defined as stories 1,000 words or less. And I run 100-Word Story magazine. And anyway, I waited tables with Gail Butensky in the early 90s in San Francisco. And she's just an amazing photographer in a lot of different ways. And she gave me about 30 she also takes these wonderful road trips through the Southwest. And so she gave me about 30 or 40 of her photos from the Southwest. And I wrote a tiny story to each photograph of flash fiction, but they're all linked together. They tell the story of Johnny and Don on this kind of, reckless drive throughout the Southwest when they're running away from a terminal illness, running away from many things, running toward many things. That's what road trips are all about. Right. And so I had a lot of fun, and I call myself a serious hobbyist photographer, and I love writing to photos. And I would like to do more books like this that have, this kind of intertextual play or conversation between photo and story. The interesting thing about this is that most publishers don't want to publish something like this. One, it's different. And two, it's somewhat expensive to reproduce photos. And the University of New Mexico Press, which published this, just did an amazing job. They wanted to make the book, the book a work of art itself, and I think that they achieved that. So I was very fortunate to find such a great publisher. And yeah, I hope I can do more of these books. And I just encourage listeners to, like photos can work great for memoir, as prompts, like, so go through your photo bin and just see what sparks your imagination, where it leads. They always say, like, one trick is not to write about what's in the frame, but what's outside the frame. And so I think I did a lot of that. I'm not writing about these photos so much as I'm telling stories about them. And that's what makes the book. And it's called Something Out There in the Distance. And I want every one of your listeners to buy it, along with Pep Talks and The Art of Brevity, and subscribe to my newsletter. Am I coming on a little too strong?
Listen, you're going to see a jump in sales like you've never seen in your life.
Okay. That's
so
what
just
I want.
Just get ready for it. Sit back.
And I want everyone to write a novel and a book and a poem, and anything you want.
And they're all going to be dedicated to you, so get ready for it.
That'd be extra special.
Say just a word or two, and that would be a fitting introduction to this whole idea of flash fiction, which I think it sounds like it is. I don't think it's a recent phenomenon, but I've really become enthralled by it. And just in case, some of our listening audience is not familiar with that whole world, what would you say about, which became, of course, the basis for this most recent book, but what is it and how does it work? What forms does it take?
Yeah, like I said, the basic definition is 1,000 words or less, but there's strangely a lot of subgenres to flash fiction, even though it's a tiny form to start with. There's microfiction, which is 400 words or less.
Wow.
There are things like my 100-word story project. There's like the 6-word memoir, or the 6-word story. And it's really about, like so much of, because we're Americans and we like big things and we privilege big things, like big long novels. Most people, when they've learned to write, they've learned how to write long and longer, but they haven't really been taught how to write short. And there's so much about good writing that really is about learning to write short. And that was my history with it, was I was introduced to the 100-word story while I was working on this, very long and doomed novel. And I took a break from it, and I could only write stories that were 150 words long. But a friend of mine who was doing 100-word stories, he said, no, you have to get them to 100 words, and when you do, they'll be better. And it's not that 100 is a magic number. Could have been 93, could have been 107. The premise is that you have this fixed container to work within, and that those constraints bring out a different type of creativity. So it's the 100-word story form, at least to me, appealed because it brought out more of my poetic side. I had to write through like hints and what was left out of the story, the art of omission. And so I had to think about what would evoke a bigger story in the reading. That's one premise of the short form, too, is that the reader becomes kind of like a collaborator, because the reader has to imagine more than they do in longer works where they're told more. So that's the loveliness of the form to me, and it taught me so much about writing, including like things like suspense, how to capture a character in just a few telling details, how to create mood, all these things. And it's really fed into my longer work, and even like flash novels like the one that I just did with Gail's photos, because it's just an aesthetic that I feel captures life. That's what it holds up a mirror to life in my mind. And even with nonfiction, for instance, there's the flash memoir, and I'm working on a flash memoir now. Okay. And it's because like my mind, I would say everybody's mind probably, although I haven't experienced other people's minds, but my mind, when I think about my life, it's like a collage of snapshots. And it's not this big linear narrative of one thing leading to the other. And so that's why I like it, because I can capture those small moments in life, but they're only small in size. They're not small in significance.
I love that. Grant, one of the things that occurred to me when I first became aware of flash fiction and was introduced to you through that Writer's Digest online course, how much religious writing over the centuries has really been fragmentary. So whether that's the Analects of Confucius, or these interesting short phrases within Zen Buddhism, the parables that Jesus taught. I mean, you can find so many examples. they're rarely more than 80 to 100 words long, right? And yet here they've existed for literally centuries, and they continue to nourish people's wisdom and understanding today. And it just seems like the form is so pliable and supple. You can use it in so many different ways. And I think it's exciting. I think the reason I wanted to ask you this, I think part of what I've picked up is the thought that flash fiction may be especially attractive to generations that are used to texts and short messages, but it seems like it goes much deeper than that.
I think so.
Right? It's been around for a long time. Does that resonate with you?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, on so many different levels, I think this short form actually is, it's an overlooked form, but it's kind of a dominant form. Rebecca Mackay said that if you were at a dinner party and transcribed that dinner party, it would be rare for anybody's story to go more than 500 words, you know?
Right.
And
Great point.
all of those religious texts that you mentioned, I suppose you could say that they work so well because they do include the reader. You know, they don't tell the reader what to do so much as include them in that mystery of thought, you know, which ends up the better way to kind of recognize yourself and recognize the divine, I think, is through the imagination and through kind of a co-creation.
Yeah, I love that. Grant, maybe just one final question. One of the things that you do beautifully through your newsletter, in addition to all your wonderful thoughts, you'll often mention a writer who means a lot to you, someone who's introduced you to something new way of looking at the world. Are there a couple of writers that you're reading right now that you really like to pass along, maybe from a recent newsletter, or just someone that's kind of nourishing your own inner spirit as you embark on this writing process?
That is like one of the worst questions to ask a writer, because
I know it isn't.
We just shut down. Like all of my brain synapses are just exploding, and I'm probably going to start spewing out smoke like in the cartoons. And anyway, no, there's just so many. I guess I'll mention. I'll mention Carvel Wallace. I'm looking at his book now. That's partly why I mentioned him, but I've been thinking about his book, his memoir, Another Word for Love. And I've actually designed this course, Writing with Love, that I'm teaching at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, from June 27th to July 3rd. And Carvel was on my podcast, and when we asked him what his other word for love is, he said struggle. And I thought that was so interesting, because it's a struggle to love better, and it's the struggle to help the people you love to also love better. And if you think about it, back to your question about attention, and attention is devotion. Well, devotion includes a struggle. Attention includes a struggle. Writing is a struggle. You know, all these things have a struggle, and we have to reckon with that struggle. Is that struggle taking things away from us, defeating our spirit, or is that struggle somehow strangely and ironically nourishing? And that's what I took from Carvel's definition of struggle. And so I think, you know, it's I mean, I mentioned that just because, you know, his memoir, he's also kind of telling these little short stories, making it into a collage. And this has been a trend in memoir too, that they're more what I call flash memoirs, stitching these little stories together. So yeah, so my course, I want to start the course with everyone thinking about what their other word for love is. And then at the end of the course, we'll also do the same exercise to see if that word deepened or changed or became another word. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Grant, it has been a pleasure. The dream of having you on the podcast has been unfolding for a while, so we've realized it, and we're just delighted that we've had this chance to talk with you. Thank you so much for the work that you do, for the gift of your writing, but also for the gift of your teaching, which is making, you know, the practice of writing accessible to so many. We wish you well in every possible way.
Thanks so much, Ed. This is always a joy to talk with you, so I really appreciate it.
All right. You take good care.
Thanks so much for listening. Round Hill Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Round Hill Community Church. For more information, please visit roundhillradio.org.